welcome in everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, November 20th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. I have some problems, as well as does just about everyone else on the internet, it seems. So we'll break that down, as well as all the other matchups for the upcoming CFP, at least in this certain ranking. Then we'll get to Notre Dame Army. We'll break down that big-time game. We'll get to Ohio State, Indiana tomorrow, but definitely want to get into this one today. A huge game that maybe Army can shock the world, knock Notre Dame out of the playoff, and put themselves right in there. Then we'll get into the Big 12 showdowns, Colorado, Kansas, as well as BYU, Arizona State. Two huge games that will probably decide who ends up going to Arlington at the end of the year. Then we'll get to the Week 13 upsets as I see them. A lot of SEC teams that have to be very nervous. I have 4 on this list of 6. Got to be very careful as they get into this week. A couple going on the road for really tough games before a big-time rivalry. Then we'll get into Week 13 questions. We'll get into all my big-time who needs to make a statement, the under-radar game, all of those type of things, and really a lot of really good under-the-radar games this upcoming weekend. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat, Use a super chat at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Add a question, comment, whatever you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen with your name. We can have fun back and forth here. Sometimes that chat goes just a little fast, so definitely a little bit easier if it gets on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Also, GSMCPodcast.net is up and working, does the exact same thing, so either one of those you'd like to use, please do, and we can make this a little bit more interactive. But let's get into this, because the CFP rankings did come out yesterday, and they're a little bit weird in a number of different places. Now, I think some of the stuff is people getting a little bit mad just to get mad, to be totally honest with you, but there are definitely some things here that I do not necessarily love, and we'll start with just the rankings, and then we'll get into the playoff picture as it is right now. But starting right off the bat, what is Missouri doing still in the top 25? I have no earthly idea why they would ever be in this grouping. Obviously, I understand they played a good game this past weekend. Brady Cook coming back was a huge part of that. Let's be honest, that's not a top 25 team in the country, probably a top 35, 40 team in the country, not a top 25 team in the country. I don't know why they didn't drop out after the loss this weekend. But whatever. Then you have UNLV at 24. You have Illinois at 25. Those are two big-time ones because UNLV does give Boise State a ranked win. Illinois does give Penn State a ranked win. So two huge things there that kind of just help out the resume of a couple of teams that are towards the top of this list, a couple of teams that are really vying for some big-time position in this playoff. So I do think that is kind of a big part of this, although I don't necessarily love that it's using ranked wins as the moniker. That is something that they use, and definitely a huge feather in the cap for Penn State as well as for Boise State, getting UNLV in there. But then you have the first big-time question, which is Iowa State and Arizona State are at 22 and 21. Then you have Tulane and Army at 20 and 19. What happens if Tulane wins out the rest of the way and Arizona State wins out the rest of the way? Or let's just say Iowa State gets to the Big 12 championship and they win it. Could the Big 12 be left out? I'd be surprised if that were to happen, let's be totally honest. But at the end of the day, it's really interesting to watch this unfold, because if Iowa State were to get in at 10-2 and then win that game at 11-2, they'd be right up against a 11-2 Tulane, or maybe even a 13-0 Army, and then you have to battle with them and a 12-1 Boise State. Maybe the Big 12 isn't quite as safe as I thought. I still think they will get in. I still tend to believe that they will get one of those byes. But it is definitely becoming more and more a question as we get closer and closer. If chaos happens, could the Big 12 be left out? I think they're giving them the option of if a Baylor or a Kansas State wins it, they probably will be left out, if I'm being totally honest. But outside of that, I would bet anyone that's ranked on here from the Big 12, if they were to win it, they would be above these teams. It's just interesting to watch, because those Arizona, Iowa State, Tulane, Army gives you an idea that maybe that Army team could just stay above a lot of these Big 12 teams and end up getting one of those bids instead of the Big 12. But moving forward, South Carolina hanging in there. Obviously, I've said before, I don't think they're going to get in. I think it's going to be really tough for them to get in, but do very much love that they're getting a little bit of love here. They absolutely are a team that deserves to be recognized in this back half of the season, and they're getting that. I don't think they're going to get much more than that, if I'm being totally honest, but at the end of the day, very cool moment for them. Then you have Clemson, Colorado, Texas A&M. that's pretty much the got to win your conference group. I think the one exception could be Texas A&M if they got to the SEC championship and then lost, because I just don't think they can punish that person. Now, we will talk about that here in a second, because Ward Manuel said something that is worrisome at the very least around that. And then I have a big issue here. BYU, they were up at 6 last week. They're down at 14 this week. They are behind an SMU team that they beat. They're behind a Boise State team that they're just outright better than, and pretty much every metric tells you that. And I'm one to talk, obviously. I had them drop out of my top 15, but I had them at 10 before. I did not think all that highly of BYU before. The committee obviously did, or they didn't, and they were just keeping them as a placeholder because they were undefeated, which is the wrong way to go about this business. So either one of two things happened. They either had BYU more highly ranked than they actually thought they should be, because they were undefeated, and that's not the right way they should go about it, or they dropped them way too far without really thinking about it, and that's not the way they should go about it. But at the end of the day, I do think they'll still probably get above Boise State, probably get above SMU if they were to win out the rest of the way. I just don't love that, and I think it shows that something in that room is not quite the way that it should be. But moving forward to the top 12 teams, Boise State makes their addition into the top 12, and I don't love it, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think they're a top 12 team in the country. I think they're putting them there to avoid all the disaster of, oh, well, this team's at number 12 and they're not in the field, or in things like that. I mean, Tennessee's at number 11 and they're not in the field. But at the end of the day, I think they're trying to avoid that as much as possible. So I think they're artificially inflating Boise State just a little bit. But at the end of the day, they are at number 12. And then you do have Tennessee, first team out. They are not going to be in the field as of right now. They have Ole Miss, Georgia, Bama, all above them. Going to be really tough to find your way above that if everything holds the way that we expect it to. Miami's ranked too high, just plain and simple. There's no reason for them to be number 8, especially when you have a BYU team all the way down there at number 14 that has been roughly better than them, probably has a better resume than they do. But at the end of the day, I understand what they're coming from here. I think it's one of those teams that obviously does have that high-end talent, but I just don't get it. I really don't. I don't think they deserve to be above SMU. I don't really think they deserve to be above BYU, if I'm being totally honest. But Miami's at number 8. They stay the course as the top ACC team. Obviously, a couple of big games coming up, but it's pretty much been sent that if Miami were to win out the rest of the way, they would go into that ACC championship as the higher-ranked team, and then you just got to win that game. Notre Dame is sitting pretty as of right now at the number 6 position. I don't think they should be there, but I guess we've given up on trying to tear down Notre Dame in any way. But they lost to NIU, who's not good in the MAC, but that's beside the point, I guess. I guess that's not important in this. But they are one of the teams that we probably should be mad at, if I'm being totally honest. But yeah, let's yell at Indiana all day long. But the top 5 is unchanged. I didn't expect it to change. A lot of people did not love that it didn't change. Here's the thing. If they were going to change it, if that was going to be a different pattern, if it was going to be, a couple of these 2-loss SEC teams on top of these teams, they would have done it immediately. They would have dropped Penn State. They would have dropped Indiana. They probably would have dropped Texas a little bit lower in this list, and they would have propped up all those other teams. Didn't happen in the first rankings, and it's probably not going to happen throughout these rankings. So if Penn State wins this weekend over Minnesota, they're going to bump up one spot if Indiana loses, or even if Ohio State loses. That's just probably the way this is going to go. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but I understand where they're coming from, at least a little bit. But let's get to the bracket here, because a lot of very interesting things. First thing, Boise State does get a bye in this scenario. I hate that, and I will break it down a little bit more in tomorrow's show, but I do not think they deserve a bye. I tend to believe they probably won't get it at the end of the day, if I'm being totally honest, but one of those things that I just do not like by any means, and the reason I don't like it so much is Ohio State's basically in the semifinals. Ohio State, I was watching the Josh Pate show yesterday, I believe, and he broke down these games. Ohio State would be a 21-point favorite against BYU if they were to play. Then they would play Boise State. Guess what? They would be more than a 21-point favorite against Boise State. They would essentially be in the semifinals before the playoff even started. That should never be the way this goes. No team should be wanting to lose their conference championship so they can get into that 5 seed, so they can dominate some lesser competition and be healthy by the time they get to the semifinals. That is a very dangerous way to go about this, and another problem with this format. But here we are, Ohio State. If this were to happen, I'm telling you, they would roll to the semifinals of the playoff. And then you do have Penn State, Georgia. You do have Indiana, Ole Miss. You do have Notre Dame, Alabama. 3 really, really fun games. And on the Pate show, they were talking about what FanDuel would have in those games. Every SEC team would be favored by 1.5 points. They would all be favored on a away from home on a northern field. So gives you an idea of what we're saying here. But at the end of the day, it would be very, very fun games. I think Georgia Penn State would be a very awesome game. Obviously, Notre Dame Bama would be an absolute classic to watch. And then Indiana Ole Miss. That would be up and down the field, be really, really fun to watch. Would go back and forth, and we would get plenty of great second round games as well. Whether it was Ole Miss or Indiana against Texas, that would be incredible. Whether it was Penn State or UGA against Miami, I think it would both be really, really fun. I tend to believe both of those teams would beat them, but still would be a very, very fun game. Ohio State, Boise State, boy, I don't care about that one. They would win and they would roll. Ohio State would. And then Alabama or Notre Dame, Oregon would be incredible. It would be absolutely incredible to watch, and one of those games that could just decide, that SEC Big Ten battle that people have been having. But it'd be a fun group, no doubt about that. I don't love that Boise State gets the bye here. I tend to believe that will not happen when they finally do this thing, but definitely a little bit worrisome. I don't love it, and I definitely don't think it's very valid, if I'm being totally honest with you. But big-time takeaways. This committee sent the message very, very loud and clear as far as I'm concerned. Win your games. Don't care who you play. Win your games. So schedule tomato can 1, 2, 3, and 4 if you're an SEC team. Schedule 3 of them if you're a Big 12 team, if you're a Big 10 team, if you're an ACC team. Avoid this at all costs. There's no point in Texas scheduling Michigan. Texas just scheduled at home and home with Notre Dame. Go ahead and cancel it. They're playing Ohio State next year. Go ahead and cancel it. There's no point in playing it, obviously, if they're not going to rank these teams according to any type of strength of schedule. They're just going to rank them, 12 wins, you're up here. 11 wins, you're right here. 10 wins, you're right here. 9 wins, you're right here. That's the way that it's breaking down right now, and it's not the way that it should break down. Strength of schedule is not being factored in nearly as much as they are telling you that it is. But the other part of this, according to the ESPN predictor, Indiana would have a 95% chance to get in with a loss to Ohio State. That should not be the case. I'm not saying they should totally be out if they lose to Ohio State, but we have to be able to judge them by what happens on the field. If that's actually correct and Indiana would get in regardless of the result to Ohio State, we're doing something wrong, just plain and simple. I don't understand why that would be the case. I don't understand how that would even be a conversation. The other part of it is apparently a 10-2 Texas would likely be in the field, according to that predictor. That's insane. They haven't had a big win either. They haven't had one of those marquee wins that you should have to have if you want to get into the playoff. Period. End of story. If you have not won a big game, if you have not shown that you can go toe-to-toe or beat one of the big-time teams in this country, you don't deserve to play with the big-time teams in the country for the biggest award in the country. Period. End of story. I don't know why that's a hard thing for people to understand, but apparently it is. But I think there's one of the things that kind of makes me lean a little bit towards maybe Indiana could drop out is what they did to BYU. I do think that could happen to Indiana in some respects. They could possibly drop out if they were to get blown out this weekend. But honestly, it feels more and more like Indiana might just be safe, regardless of what happens, regardless of the score, regardless of if they get blown out by 50. It feels like they might just be safe regardless, which is absolutely ridiculous. The same way that if Texas were to lose to A&M and still be safe, it would be absolutely ridiculous. So I don't like this committee. I'll be totally honest. I think they're doing the best that they can. I'm not arguing that, but when they said that they watch the games and they watch film and they break it all down, either they were lying or they are missing what I'm seeing, if I'm being totally honest. So no disrespect. I obviously, respect to them for doing this. They're doing it poorly. I'll just be totally honest. It's not nearly the way that it should be, and I have a feeling that they're going to have Greg Sankey busting down their doors after Selection Sunday because I think they're going to make the wrong decision somewhere. I can't promise that, but I have a feeling that they're going to do something that they probably shouldn't do just because a team won some games that they should win. But that's beside the point. We will get into that throughout the week and throughout the next couple of weeks. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, we'll get into Notre Dame Army, a huge game going on in Yankee Stadium this upcoming weekend, and we got to break it down, got to give it some love right after this, so stick with us.